The battlefield was silent now, only broken metal and the smell of burned soil stretching as far as she could see. Dr. Evelyn Cross walked carefully through the ruins, her boots crunching over ash and glass. She had seen many destroyed worlds, but this one felt different. It wasn't just another mission. Something about this place carried the weight of sorrow. The predator aliens had fought hard here, leaving nothing alive. Or so everyone believed. As she checked her scanner, a faint sound reached her ears. Soft, shaky, almost like a whimper. At first, she thought it was just the wind moving through the broken walls. But then she heard it again. A weak cry that made her heart tighten. Evelyn froze. It couldn't be. All predator life forms were supposed to be gone. Still, the sound continued, fragile and desperate. Against all the warnings drilled into her by years of training, she followed the noise deeper into the dark remains of what once had been a nest. The air grew heavier as she moved forward. The walls were marked with claw scratches and scorch burns. Her flashlight flickered over strange symbols painted in a language she didn't understand. The cry grew louder now, frightened, but not threatening. Carefully, Evelyn lifted a broken metal sheet and gasped. Beneath it, huddled in the dust, was a tiny creature with gray-black skin and faint glowing lines running down its arms. Its eyes, large and golden, stared up at her, wide with fear. It looked like a predator cub, the kind her people had fought against for years. She had read the reports. These creatures were ruthless hunters from birth, unable to feel mercy or peace. Yet what she saw in front of her wasn't a monster. It was a trembling child, bleeding and alone. Her hand instinctively reached for her weapon, but she couldn't bring herself to aim. The cub tried to crawl backward, pressing against the corner, too weak to run. Evelyn's mind screamed protocol. She was supposed to call security and have the creature eliminated. But another voice whispered louder, the voice of her humanity. The cub let out another small sound, almost like a cry for help. Slowly, Evelyn put her weapon aside and crouched down, lowering herself to its level. "It's okay," she whispered softly, her voice trembling. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature blinked at her, its chest rising and falling fast. For a moment, neither moved. Evelyn gently reached out her hand, showing her empty palm. The cub stared at it, then hesitated before stretching one trembling claw toward her. When their fingers touched, something unexpected happened. The fear in its eyes changed into a flicker of trust. Evelyn felt her heart race. She had studied alien biology her whole life, but this moment wasn't about science. It was something deeply human, a connection she couldn't explain. She took a slow breath, knowing the risk she was taking. The cub was small enough to fit in her arms, but its claws were sharp, its strength surprising. Still, when she carefully lifted it, the creature didn't resist. It simply curled into her chest, its trembling slowly fading. She could feel its heartbeat against her suit, fast, frightened, but alive. Looking down at it, Evelyn whispered, "You're just a baby." The communicator on her wrist buzzed with a voice asking for her status, but she didn't answer. She knew what would happen if anyone found out. They would take the cub away, study it, maybe destroy it. Evelyn wasn't ready to let that happen. As she looked out over the destroyed nest, she realized she was standing at the edge of something much bigger than science or war. For years, humans believed that predator aliens couldn't feel anything but hate. But now, holding this tiny life in her arms, Evelyn began to wonder if everything they thought they knew was wrong. The night was quiet when Evelyn returned to the base, but her mind was louder than ever. Every rule, every piece of training she had received told her to report the creature immediately. The military handbook was clear. Predator species were too dangerous to live. They had destroyed entire colonies before, and no one wanted to risk another tragedy. But when Evelyn looked down at the small cub wrapped inside her coat, she couldn't see a monster. She saw a helpless being that was scared and injured, just trying to survive. The tiny creature made a soft sound, something between a sigh and a whimper, as if it trusted her now. That single sound made her decision for her. She wasn't going to turn it in. Not tonight. She slipped through the quiet corridors of the research station, moving carefully so the cameras wouldn't catch her. Most of the crew were asleep, and the few guards on duty barely looked up as she walked by, holding a sealed supply case in her hands. Inside it, hidden under medical cloth, the small alien cub shivered. Her heart pounded with every step until she reached her private lab quarters. Once inside, she locked the door, took a deep breath, and opened the case. The little creature blinked in the soft light, weak but alert. Its eyes glowed faintly, like golden embers. Evelyn spoke gently, her voice low and calm. "You're safe now." She wasn't sure if the cub understood, but it stopped trembling. Using her medical kit, she cleaned the wounds on its arms and legs. Each time the disinfectant touched its skin, the cub hissed, a small flash of light rippling across its body. A natural defense, she guessed. Evelyn didn't flinch. She whispered softly, "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The sound of her voice seemed to calm the creature more than anything else. After a while, its breathing slowed and its eyes grew heavy with exhaustion. When she finally wrapped it in a soft blanket and set it on her bunk, it curled up like a child and fell asleep. For the first time in hours, Evelyn sat down and let herself feel the weight of what she'd done. She had just committed a serious crime, hiding an alien life form, one her government had sworn to destroy. If anyone found out, she could lose everything: her position, her reputation, even her freedom. But when she looked at the small shape resting quietly on her bed, all she could think about was how peaceful it looked. That didn't seem like a creature of violence. That seemed like life, pure and fragile. In the following days, she tried to continue her normal duties, but it wasn't easy. She kept sneaking food from the cafeteria, pretending it was for experiments. Late at night, she would return to her quarters and quietly check on the cub. It began to trust her more each day, letting her touch it without fear. She studied its reactions, noticed how it tilted its head when she spoke, or how its eyes followed her every movement. It was learning, and fast. Evelyn began calling it Kiro, a word from an old Earth language meaning light. Somehow, it fit perfectly. But soon, strange noises started to draw attention. One night, while Evelyn was feeding Kiro, someone knocked on her door. She froze. Her heart raced as she quickly hid the cub under the bed. "Everything okay in there?" a crewmate asked. Evelyn forced a smile and replied through the door, "Just some equipment malfunction, nothing serious." The footsteps faded, and she let out a shaky breath. It was getting harder to keep her secret. Still, when she turned around, Kiro peeked out from under the bed, eyes wide and innocent. Evelyn knelt beside him, brushing her fingers gently over his head. "You have no idea how much trouble you're causing," she whispered with a small smile. The cub made a soft, clicking sound in response, almost like laughter. That moment of connection made her forget her fear for a while. She knew she was crossing a dangerous line, one that could end everything she had worked for. But deep inside, she also knew something else. Saving Kiro wasn't a mistake. It was the first truly human thing she had done in a long time. The days passed quietly, each one filled with a strange new rhythm that Evelyn hadn't known before. Her life used to be made up of reports, data charts, and long hours spent studying lifeless samples under a microscope. But now, her small lab had become something else. A secret world shared between her and Cairo. Every morning before the others woke up, she would unlock the sealed drawer where Kiro slept and whisper softly, "Good morning, little one." The cub would stretch its thin limbs, blink its golden eyes, and make a soft chirping sound that almost sounded like a greeting. Evelyn had stopped thinking of it as a creature. It felt more like someone. Over time, she noticed something remarkable. Kiro was learning, not just reacting, but truly learning. When she smiled at him, he tried to copy the expression, though his alien features made it look a little strange. When she frowned or sighed, he tilted his head in confusion, then tried to mimic that too, as if studying her emotions. Sometimes, when she talked aloud while typing, he would listen carefully, his gaze following every movement of her lips. It was like watching a child discover the world for the first time. Evelyn found herself speaking to him more and more, forgetting he might not understand. But then, little by little, he began to respond. One morning, while she was sorting through files, her datapad slipped from her hands and clattered across the floor. The sound made Kiro jump, but before she could reach down to pick it up, he darted forward on his small clawed feet, grabbed it carefully, and brought it back to her. For a moment, Evelyn just stared. He hadn't done it out of instinct. He had understood what she wanted. When she took the pad from him, she whispered, "Thank you." Kiro blinked, then pressed his small hand against her palm. His touch was warm and steady, and that simple gesture made Evelyn's throat tighten with emotion. She had seen soldiers, scientists, and machines her whole life. But this small being, once considered a monster, had shown her more kindness than most humans she knew. As the bond between them grew, so did the risk. Kiro had strange abilities she didn't fully understand. Sometimes, when he got frightened or excited, the lights in her room flickered. Once, she woke up in the middle of the night to see faint, glowing symbols shimmering on the wall, the same ones she'd seen in the ruins where she first found him. She didn't know what they meant, but she could tell Kiro was communicating somehow. The more time they spent together, the stronger the connection became. He no longer hissed or hid when she approached. Instead, he followed her around the room, curious and alert, touching every tool, every book, every light panel. He was exploring her world just as she had once explored his, but her secret was getting harder to keep. The base was small, and the people around her were starting to notice odd things. Strange noises in the night, flickers of energy, and small scratches on her door. Her commanding officer, a sharp-eyed man who trusted no one, called her in one morning. "Dr. Cross," he said, folding his arms, "we've been picking up strange energy readings from your quarters. Care to explain?" Evelyn felt her stomach twist. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She forced a calm smile and replied, "Just a malfunction from one of my scanners. I'll check it myself." He studied her face for a long time, then nodded slowly, though she could tell he didn't believe her. When she returned to her room, she found Kiro sitting on the floor, his golden eyes full of worry. He seemed to sense her fear. She knelt down and stroked his head gently, whispering, "We're running out of time." The words came out shaky, her heart heavy. Kiro leaned closer, pressing his forehead against her arm. In that moment, Evelyn realized something she could never unsee. This was not a beast she was hiding. This was a life that trusted her completely. But that trust came with a truth she could no longer avoid. The world outside her door would never understand what she had found. It was early morning when everything fell apart. Evelyn was running a quiet scan in her lab, pretending everything was normal, while Kiro played near the corner of the room. He had grown stronger, faster, and far more curious. She had told him many times to stay hidden, especially during the day when technicians walked past her door, but he had started exploring the air vents lately, slipping through the narrow spaces like a shadow. She thought he was safe there, unseen, unnoticed. But that morning, a young technician was working on the ventilation system, fixing a power relay, when he spotted two glowing eyes staring back at him. He froze for a second, then shouted, "There's something alive in the vents!" Within moments, the alarm blared through the entire base. Evelyn's heart stopped. She ran out into the corridor, trying to act confused, but she could already hear soldiers shouting, boots pounding, weapons being loaded. "All personnel, clear the lower deck," someone yelled over the intercom. Her mind raced. Kiro must be terrified. Without thinking, she sprinted back toward her quarters, ignoring the startled looks from passing crew members. By the time she reached her door, soldiers were already there, surrounding her lab. One of them barked an order, "Step aside, doctor!" But Evelyn pushed through them, yelling, "Wait! Please don't shoot!" She burst into the room just as Kiro crawled out of the vent, his small body shaking, his golden eyes wide with fear. The soldiers lifted their weapons instantly. Evelyn's instincts took over. She ran forward and stood between the soldiers and the cub, spreading her arms. "He's not dangerous," she shouted, her voice breaking. "He's just scared." The soldiers hesitated for a moment, glancing at one another, unsure of what to do. The officer in charge pressed his comlink and spoke coldly, "Command, we have visual confirmation. Predator life form inside the research station. Awaiting orders." The reply came almost immediately, sharp and merciless. "Eliminate the creature." The room froze. Evelyn shook her head violently. "No, you can't. He's just a child." But the soldiers began to move forward, weapons ready. Kiro let out a low sound, a frightened hum that grew deeper, vibrating in the air. The lights flickered, and a strange energy filled the room. Evelyn looked back at him, her eyes wide with fear and awe. "Kiro, stop," she whispered, but he didn't look angry. He looked heartbroken. Then something unexpected happened. The hum turned into a sound, not a roar, not a scream, but a tone so pure and emotional it felt almost human. It was a cry that seemed to reach straight into the heart. Every person in that room felt it, the vibration of sorrow, fear, and connection. The sound made the weapons lower slightly. The youngest soldier blinked, his hands shaking. "Ma'am," he whispered to his officer, "it's not attacking." The commanding officer hesitated, looking at Evelyn and the small creature standing behind her. Kiro's glowing eyes were fixed on the humans, not in anger but in confusion, as if asking why they wanted to hurt him. Evelyn slowly turned to face the soldiers. Her voice was steady but full of emotion. "Please," she said softly, "look at him. He's not a monster. He's alive and he trusts me. Don't take that away." The silence in the room felt heavy, almost sacred. The soldiers didn't move, caught between orders and the moment unfolding before them. Kiro slowly stepped forward, still trembling, and pressed his clawed hand against Evelyn's leg. The gesture was small but full of meaning. He was scared. Yet he chose to stand beside her instead of running. That simple act, a child seeking comfort, broke the last of the tension. The officer lowered his weapon slightly, breathing out. "Stand down," he ordered quietly, though his voice trembled. The alarms still echoed through the corridors, but inside that room, time seemed to stop. Evelyn knew this peace wouldn't last. Command would demand answers, and soon there would be no way to protect Kiro. But as she looked down at him, her heart filled with a strange mix of fear and pride. For the first time, she realized that maybe Kiro had saved her, not the other way around. In that single cry, he had reminded everyone, even the ones holding guns, that compassion was stronger than fear. Evelyn knew there was no turning back. The moment she looked into Kiro's frightened eyes after the soldiers left, her decision was made. The military would never understand. To them, he was just a threat, something that needed to be destroyed before it grew dangerous. But to her, he was more than that. He was proof that humanity's beliefs about his species were wrong. And so, under the cover of night, she packed a small bag, gathered what little food and medical supplies she could find, and wrapped Kiro in a thick survival blanket. The alarms were silent now, but the base felt colder than ever. Before leaving, she whispered, "We're going home, Kiro, somewhere safe." They slipped through the back tunnels of the base, moving carefully between shadows. The air outside was sharp and icy, the wind biting against her face. The planet's twin moons hung above, casting a pale glow over the rocky terrain. Every sound, the rustle of wind, the creak of her boots on the frozen ground, made her heart race. Behind her, the faint hum of patrol drones echoed in the distance. She tightened her grip on Kiro and moved faster. For days, they traveled across the wilderness. They crossed frozen rivers and hid in old abandoned outposts that had once been used by explorers. Most were empty now, filled only with dust, rusted tools, and silence. At night, Evelyn would light a small fire using the emergency flares she had stolen. Kiro would curl up beside her, his body warm like a living blanket. Sometimes she talked to him quietly, as if he could understand. "You know, I used to think your kind hated us," she would say softly. "But maybe it's us who never tried to understand you." The nights were long and cruel. The cold seeped into her bones and food grew scarce. Evelyn learned to melt snow for water and ration every meal carefully. Kiro seemed to sense her struggles. He would nudge her hand with his small, clawed fingers, offering comfort in his own quiet way. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, not with menace, but with warmth. Despite the fear and exhaustion, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose. One morning, as the storm winds howled outside, Evelyn was scanning the horizon through a cracked window of an old research shelter when she spotted movement. A drone, one of the military's, flying low and scanning the ground. Her chest tightened. "They've found us," she whispered. She grabbed her pack and turned to Kiro, who had already sensed danger. The drone's light swept across the snow, growing brighter as it approached. Evelyn started running, clutching Kiro close. The sound of the drone grew louder, sharper. Then a sudden beam of light locked on her position. Before she could react, Kiro wriggled free from her arms and leaped toward the drone. Evelyn screamed, "No!" But it was too late. The air crackled with energy, and in a blinding flash, Kiro released a surge of blue light that exploded through the air. The drone shattered, falling to the ground in smoking pieces. For a moment, everything was still. Only the sound of wind and Evelyn's heartbeat remained. She ran to Kiro, terrified he might be hurt. But he stood there trembling, his eyes brighter than before. Evelyn dropped to her knees, pulling him close. You saved me," she whispered, still shaken. She looked at the remains of the drone and then at him, realizing what had just happened. That energy, it came from him, but it wasn't wild or angry. It had protected her. She felt tears sting her eyes as she looked at the small creature who had once been labeled a monster. "You're changing," she said softly. "And maybe, so am I." From that day on, their bond grew stronger. They moved together as one, not just hiding, but surviving. Evelyn began to notice something remarkable. When Kiro touched her hand, she could feel a faint warmth spreading through her body, giving her strength. It was as if his energy was flowing into her, keeping her alive in the freezing world. And though the military might still be searching for them, she no longer felt afraid. She knew now that what connected them was more powerful than any weapon. A bond built not on fear, but on trust, sacrifice, and something that felt very close to love. Snow fell softly as Evelyn trudged through the endless white fields, her breath visible in the freezing air. It had been weeks since she and Kiro escaped the base. Supplies were running low and exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. Yet every time she looked at Kiro trotting beside her, his glowing eyes full of quiet trust, she found the strength to take one more step. They had become each other's family now. Two survivors from different worlds bound by something that went far beyond logic. One afternoon, while searching for shelter among the ruins of an old alien structure, Evelyn's scanner picked up a faint signal, weak but rhythmic like a heartbeat. Curious, she followed it, carefully pushing through the wreckage until she found a small metal sphere half buried under ice. It pulsed with dim blue light and made a soft humming sound. "What is this?" she whispered, brushing off the frost. Kiro tilted his head, his body suddenly alert. Then, to her astonishment, he began making soft, melodic chirps in response. Evelyn froze, staring. The sounds that came from Kiro weren't random. They had a pattern, a rhythm, like a conversation. The device responded with gentle tones, and Kiro answered again, higher this time, almost like he was singing. Evelyn activated her recorder, capturing every moment. As she listened closer, she realized the sounds weren't aggressive. They didn't resemble attack signals or coded messages of war. No, they were slow, sorrowful, almost mournful. It felt like a song of loss. For hours, Kiro continued communicating with the beacon. Sometimes his voice trembled, and Evelyn could see his small body shaking as if he remembered something painful. She sat beside him, quietly observing, feeling a lump form in her throat. The realization came slowly, but hit her with immense force. These creatures, the ones humanity had fought for years, were not mindless predators. They had feelings. They grieved their dead. They sang to honor those they had lost. The sounds were filled with emotion, and the pain in them felt deeply human. Evelyn's hands trembled as she played back the recording. She translated the frequencies into patterns her computer could interpret and saw waves of energy that aligned perfectly with emotional responses: sorrow, longing, remembrance. Her chest tightened. "All this time," she whispered, "we thought they wanted war, but they were mourning." The truth was heavier than any scientific discovery she had ever made. Humanity hadn't just misjudged a species. They had destroyed families, children, and homes without ever trying to understand. Kiro nuzzled her arm gently, as if sensing her emotions. She smiled weakly, wiping away a tear. "You were never the enemy, were you?" she said softly. The cub blinked slowly, resting his head on her lap. In that moment, she realized what her next step had to be. This discovery wasn't just proof of alien emotion, it was proof that peace was possible. But to make anyone believe it, she needed to return. She needed to bring this evidence back to the very people who had ordered Kiro's kind to be exterminated. The idea terrified her. Going back meant facing punishment, imprisonment, maybe even worse. She would be branded a traitor for protecting an alien and defying military orders. But the thought of staying silent was even worse. "If I don't tell them," she whispered, "this war will never end." Kiro looked up, his gaze steady and trusting. It was as if he understood her decision. He gave a low hum, placing one small, clawed hand against her chest, right over her heart. That simple gesture filled her with courage. She took a deep breath and stood. "Then we go back," she said firmly. The beacon flickered one last time, sending its message into the empty sky before falling silent. Evelyn recorded the last transmission and packed the device into her bag. As the storm began to rise around them, she looked at Kiro and smiled. "They may call you a monster," she murmured, "but you've shown me more humanity than most humans ever could." And with that, they set off toward the distant lights of civilization, toward danger, toward judgment, but also toward truth. For the first time in her life, Evelyn wasn't driven by science or orders. She was driven by something far greater: trust, born from the bond between a human and the creature everyone else had feared. When Evelyn finally reached the station, her body was trembling with exhaustion. The long journey through frozen lands had drained every ounce of strength she had left. Her clothes were torn, her hands frostbitten, but her heart burned with determination. Kiro walked beside her, weak but still alert, his glowing eyes scanning the perimeter as the tall metallic gates of the outpost came into view. The moment they stepped within range, alarms blared. Armed soldiers surrounded them in seconds, weapons raised, shouting orders. Evelyn didn't resist. She simply lifted her hands and said quietly, "I need to speak to the commander." They didn't listen. She was thrown to the ground, her wrists bound, and Kiro was pulled from her arms. The cub let out a sharp cry that echoed through the hangar. It was a sound full of fear, not aggression. The soldiers dragged him into a reinforced containment pod while Evelyn shouted, "Don't hurt him! Please, he's not dangerous!" No one believed her. They treated the small creature like a threat, locking the pod with multiple security codes. As they escorted her inside, whispers followed her down the hallway. Some calling her crazy, others calling her a traitor. But Evelyn's eyes stayed fixed ahead. She knew what she carried was far greater than her reputation. Hours later, she was brought before the command council. The cold room was filled with officers, scientists, and analysts. The commander sat at the center, an older man known for his strictness. His eyes narrowed as Evelyn entered. "Doctor," he said sternly, "you violated direct orders. You harbored an alien species classified as hostile. Do you have any defense before we proceed with sentencing?" Evelyn stood still, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Yes," she said. "But before you judge me, you need to hear something." She motioned to the console beside her. One of the guards hesitated but activated it under the commander's nod. The room filled with sound, low, haunting tones that seemed to vibrate through the walls. It wasn't just noise. It was music. The recording of Kiro's communication with the beacon played clearly, and as the melody unfolded, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The notes carried pain, longing, and remembrance. It was impossible to listen without feeling something stir deep inside. For a long moment, no one spoke. Even the commander's stern expression began to soften. "What is this?" he finally asked, his voice quieter now. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes tired but unwavering. "These are not attack signals," she said. "They are songs of mourning." Kiro's kind wasn't preparing for war. They were grieving. "We destroyed them because we never tried to understand them." Her words echoed across the chamber, heavy and sincere. Some of the officers looked down, unable to meet her eyes. Others shifted uneasily, realizing what she was saying. The silence in the room was thick. Evelyn took a step closer to the center table. "They were only defending what was left of their children," she continued. "When we found their nests, we didn't see families, we saw enemies. But I've seen the truth. I've lived beside one of them. They feel pain. They trust. They protect, just like us. The commander leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "And what do you expect us to do with this information?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Listen. That's all I ask. Listen before we destroy another life." The final notes of the recording faded into silence. For a while, no one moved. The same soldiers who had mocked her before now stood motionless, faces pale, uncertain of what to believe. One of them whispered, "It sounds human." Evelyn closed her eyes, feeling tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed. "Because it is," she replied. "It's the sound of loss, something every living being understands." No one spoke for several minutes. The commander finally stood and gave a quiet order. "Release the creature from its cell," he said. "We'll review her evidence." Evelyn's knees almost gave way from relief. She didn't know what would happen next, whether she'd be free or punished. But for the first time, she saw a flicker of humanity in their eyes. As Kiro was brought in, still wary but unharmed, he looked at Evelyn and made a low, gentle sound, the same one he had made when she first found him. She smiled faintly, whispering, "It's okay now." For the first time in years, the line between human and alien didn't seem so wide. It was fragile, yes, but it was finally beginning to fade, replaced by something far stronger, understanding. The decision came after days of debate that felt like an eternity. Evelyn sat alone in her holding cell, staring through the small glass window as soldiers and scientists walked past, whispering about her case. The evidence she had brought, the recordings, the beacon data, the emotional resonance patterns, had divided the entire command council. Some still believed she was naive, manipulated by the alien. Others, though, had begun to question everything they had been taught. When the door finally opened, the commander entered, his expression unreadable. "Doctor," he said quietly, "the council has reached a decision." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest. "And?" she asked. He paused for a long moment, then said, "The creature will not be terminated." The air left her lungs in a shaky breath. "You mean—" she started, but he raised a hand to stop her. "However," he continued, "it will remain under close observation. You'll be responsible for its care and communication studies. Any violation of protocol, and this mercy ends." Evelyn nodded immediately, unable to hide the emotion in her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. When she was led to the containment chamber, she saw Cairo sitting quietly inside, his bright eyes dimmed from fear. The moment he saw her, he rose and pressed his hand against the glass. Evelyn stepped closer and placed her palm against his. "It's all right," she murmured. "We're safe now." The guard hesitated, then deactivated the lock. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Kiro slowly stepped out. Instead of running or hissing, he simply leaned forward and rested his head gently against her shoulder, just like he had done the first time she found him in the ruins. The soldiers watching didn't move. They had expected a monster. What they saw instead was trust. In the months that followed, Evelyn and Kiro worked side by side in the new research division formed to study alien communication. The recordings she had brought back became the foundation of what was later called the Harmony Project, an initiative to decode the emotional language of the predator species. For the first time in history, messages were exchanged between humans and the alien survivors. What started as cautious contact slowly turned into understanding. They learned that both sides had suffered equally from the war. Both had lost families, homes, and peace. As the research grew, so did Kiro. His once small frame became strong and graceful, but his bond with Evelyn never changed. He stayed near her, protective and loyal. The fear that once filled the research station began to fade, replaced by curiosity and respect. Soldiers who used to glare at him now nodded as he passed. Children of the staff would sometimes leave drawings of him near the lab, drawings not of a monster, but of a friend. Years later, the moment everyone thought impossible finally came. Earth and the alien species signed the first interspecies peace accord. a promise to end the cycle of fear and begin rebuilding what both sides had lost. The event took place on the same station where Evelyn had once been arrested. The council built a memorial stone in the courtyard, carved with simple but powerful words. One woman listened. One cub trusted, and that changed everything. During the ceremony, Evelyn stood silently before the stone, her heart full. Around her were representatives from both worlds, human scientists and alien envoys standing side by side. Kiro, now towering but gentle, stood behind her. His eyes glowed softly in the fading sunlight. When the speeches ended and the crowd began to leave, Kiro lowered his head beside her shoulder, just like he had done years ago when he was small. Evelyn smiled, feeling tears gather in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "You and me." Kiro let out a quiet hum, a sound that resonated with warmth. Not a growl, not a command, but something that felt like peace. Evelyn closed her eyes and listened. For once, the universe was silent, not in fear, but in harmony. In that moment, she understood the truth that had guided her all along. Sometimes, all it takes to change the world is the courage to listen, and the heart to believe that even the fiercest beings can be kind.